today I'm here to talk about the best books that I read in 2022, so let's just get into it. The first on the list is Crying in H Mart by Michelle Zauner. This is her memoir about growing up Korean American, her mother dying, and how that made her reflect on her identity. This was the first book I read this year, so I started off the year great. And it's also a contender for the best book I've read this year. This book was incredibly beautiful, it was heart-wrenching, and it's a book that's gonna stay with me forever. I highly recommend. Next is Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. So this book takes place in Area X, which has been cut off from civilization for decades. And it's been overtaken by nature, and the government is sending in missions to explore the area and learn about why it's like that. And every time everyone dies or they come back, when they come back they're very different. So this book follows the story of one expedition that goes in there and you see Area X from a first person point of view. This is a strange, very atmospheric book, but it really grips you right from the beginning. It's really short, but you just can't put it down, so honestly you could probably read this in a day or in a single sitting if you wanted to. I will say this is the best book in the trilogy and the other two aren't as great, but I still really recommend it. I loved this book. After that we have On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. This book describes itself as a letter from a son to a mother who cannot read. That is the line, first line on the back. It's why I picked up this book in the first place and why I bought it. This is a very character-focused novel. It follows the main character's family history from Vietnam to the current day. It's also a queer novel, so it follows that theme as well as exploring the themes of race and class. And this book is just beautifully written. It's really lyrical writing. I feel like I had to underline a sentence in every other page, if not every page. It was just really beautiful, and you'd have to like sit there with the sentence to fully digest it, and it was a really enjoyable reading experience. So again, highly recommend. Then we have the only non-fiction book that made the list. I haven't been reading much non-fiction this year, which I'm definitely going to need to change for 2023. But anyway, that book is The Autobiography of Malcolm X, written by Malcolm X, of course. This book follows his entire life journey from his childhood to a prison cell to Mecca to ultimately his assassination. It really just shows you what an incredible man he was, and it teaches you so much about him, which I feel like is really important because there's so much misinformation about Malcolm X out there, and it all attempts to deface his legacy. But I think when you read this, you realize how gross all of that misinformation is and how he was a very reasonable, rational man. And yeah, I could go on and on about this, but I'm going to stop there. I will say though that it's also a very, very easy read. So if you're someone who's not typically into nonfiction, you can still go into this and it will read more like a novel than like normal nonfiction will. It's not very heavy at all. Very easy to follow along. Then we have another science fiction read, which is The Dispossessed by Ursula Le Guin. This book follows our main character, Shevik. I don't know how to say his name. He's basically a physicist and he's living in an anarchist society, but his work is kind of being held back by jealous colleagues, so he decides to go to his world's sister planet, which is a capitalist society. And there he hoped to find more liberation and freedom, but then he just realizes that he's a pawn in a deadly political game. This book was so interesting and so thought-provoking. I love the descriptions of the anarchist society and just kind of the culture shock he had when he went to the capitalist society. I thought it was really interesting to think about how just like our daily habits and the way we think about things would be different if we had grown up in a more egalitarian society. So I think the world building was just amazing here. Highly recommend. I think it's a pretty good like science fiction novel too if you're not that into science fiction. This and Annihilation I think are pretty good starts. Although this one, like, you do have to go into it and there's a lot more world building, so it's a little bit more dense at the beginning, but you quickly get into it and it's easy to follow along. Next, we have The Listeners by Jordan Tannehill. This book follows our main character Claire, who starts to hear this humming noise that no one else around her hears. It's slowly driving her crazy, it's ruining her life, she has headaches, she can't sleep, she's doing poorly at her job, and then she finds out that there's a group of neighbors who are also hearing the noise, and they're hosting like weekly self-help groups with it. However, this group, which started as a self-help group, begins to get more and more extreme and ultimately has devastating consequences. This book is so captivating. I was backpacking through the UK when I picked it up on a whim and I still couldn't put it down. All I wanted to do was read even though I was traveling. I also think it's really underrated because it doesn't have amazing Goodreads reviews, but I think more people should read this because I think it's a really great book. Then we have Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. This book I'm not even going to try explaining to you. First of all, I don't know if I could. It's a really, really unique book, but that makes it really, really hard to describe. But also I think it's much, much, much better to go into this completely blind and just kind of letting the story take you along. Like I said, it's so unique, and that's probably why it's made it onto this list. Even though I really enjoyed it, just that's what makes it one of the best books I read in 2022. It is a little confusing at first. It takes a little bit to completely adjust and figure out what's really going on, but as soon as you do, you're gonna be captivated. And you're never going to guess how this ends. Highly recommend. This book makes me want to read anything else that Susanna Clarke has written. The next book is probably the most beautiful cover out of all of these, and that is The Woman Destroyed by Simone de Beauvoir. This book is comprised of 3 stories. I wouldn't say they're short stories because they're pretty long, but they're all about women facing some sort of crisis. My favorite of the bunch, and the reason it made it onto this list, is the last story, which follows a woman whose relationship is ending and she kind of goes crazy. I read this book not long after being broken up with, so it really validated those feelings for me, and it was very healing to read. And then of course I really like Simone de Beauvoir's writing. I think this was a really enjoyable little collection. And then we have the last book on this list, which is Tender as the Flesh by Augustina Bazterrica. I'm so sorry. I thought I had it and then I realized I didn't have it. This book takes place in a world where all the animals had gotten infected with this deadly virus and they had to be killed off. Although there is a point in this book where the main character thinks that might be a big lie, but regardless, that's what you're told. And as a result, because of course people have to keep eating meat, because what would they do otherwise? They start eating other humans. So you're following the main character who works in this meat processing plant, and he's given a live specimen, and he gradually starts treating her more and more like an actual human being, even though he knows the punishment for that is death. This book is very disturbing, but it's so compelling and it's so thought-provoking. It's definitely one of my favorites of the year, and I can't recommend it enough. Well, there you go. Those are all my favorite books of 2022. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon with another video. Goodbye!